Okay, finally here, as promised, with the author of Bullied Behind Bars, a gay Christian Trump supporter goes to prison, Matthew Melvin. Welcome to the podcast. Pleasure to have you here. What we said we were going to start with discussing today was a little bit about your background and your upbringing. It's a really interesting book. You go into a lot of things, what it's like to be in jail, how you got in jail. But really, I think the crux of your story, I'll give you an opportunity to explain this better, is really the failures of the criminal justice system. And I've seen some of that firsthand. And so I think it's really a fascinating story on a multiple of different fronts I hope we can get into today. But why don't we start? You end up in jail. We know that part of the story from the title. And you're obviously questioning the effectiveness of the system, and certainly not the first person to bring up those questions. And so it'll be interesting to hear that from your perspective. But let's talk a little bit about what landed you in jail and how you ultimately got there. And let's start with your upbringing. You talk in the book about, you refer to your mother as a nagging mother, which is not a new phenomena either. And you talk about your father and his military service. I'm interested what branch, but how was your relationship with your mother and father as it relates to the book and the story?
My mother was a very controlling individual, somewhat emotionally abusive, condescending, and I never felt like I could do anything right. Whether it was when I sold Cutco, going in people's homes to sell a knife company that was based in Olean, New York, or any other job that I had, I never felt like I was worthy of being called her son. My father was in the Marines. He served in Vietnam. He received a Purple Heart, and he received Agent Orange as a result of being in that environment. And there's some speculation that I may have gotten some of that Agent Orange. And we tried to use that as a mitigating circumstance in the second time I got charged with the federal crimes. However, the government didn't really buy into it.
Matt, I think you said in the book, are you autistic, did you say?
I am, yes.
Autistic. What does that mean to be autistic, in your words?
It means that you're a little bit slower to pick up on things, that you may misinterpret people's cues. You may misalign what somebody's trying to say to you as being something else.
Do you know what your dad did in the Marine Corps? You know what his job was by any chance?
I don't know specifically. I know he served in the Vietnam War and in the Marines.
I had a funny feeling you were going to say that, by the way. You didn't say in the book what branch. You know, I'm a Marine combat veteran. And
I do.
I could just kind of tell from reading the book, and I was like, I bet you any chance he's got a Marine father. And, you know, there really is a phenomena where sometimes children of Marine fathers struggle. And we don't talk about it a whole lot from the Marine Corps side, but it's something that could be talked about a little bit more. Do you think that the autism, that there's a tie between the Agent Orange and the autism?
I do.
What makes you say that?
Well, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I think that certainly that could have led to the autism. And certainly the impulsiveness that I have still exists today. I have to really watch out on the impulsiveness. That doesn't go away. And there's no, I've tried many medications. I've found from Prozac to other drugs that they are not effective, that all you're doing is making me emotionless and just stale and boring. And I'm a very lively individual. So I've tried many drugs, but they, to me, are not effective. I don't want to change who I am personally, my personality. What I want to do is control the impulses. And there is no drug in the world that will control that. I just have to make a decision that the impulsiveness of the decisions that I've made in the past are not worth it. And I need to let that go. And
have you learned that, Matt? Do you think you have a little, how old are you now?
I'm 40 years old.
40. Do you feel like you have more self-control now?
I do. I've learned that, you know, revenge and being retaliatory has not bode well for me. And it really is a cancer. It just sits in you and festers. And that's why I found that, you know, I started going to church. I started going about 6 years ago, and I've been slowly becoming more involved in that. I find that the more time I have, I occupy, the less free time, the less time I have to think about retaliatory things.
Matt, do you feel mentally ill?
I don't know.
No. I mean, because what you're describing, I could say all those same things about myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I sometimes wonder if I'm not autistic, right? There's
Right.
different ways this stuff manifests. So, because I think about retaliation all the time too. What's your relationship like with your parents today?
I would say it's significantly better.
Good.
My mom still worries. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but on Father's Day, an individual that I served with in prison actually showed up at our house with one bag, and he walked to our house, rang the doorbell, and it was about 5:30 at night, and he thought that he was going to come live with me. My information was out there because of various outlets like Shelburne News, and so my address was out there. And I
Your mom's worried about that kind of thing?
She's worried about this individual coming back and doing harm to us.
What made him think he could stay with you?
I don't know. We played cards a couple of times in prison. I have a feeling that he's gay. I don't know that. But, you know, nobody. First of all, let's take a step back. When you're on supervision, you have to you have to get authorization of where you're going to live. And so you can't live in a home where there's a convicted felon. Now, there are a few exceptions. If it's a direct sibling, then that doesn't apply. But you can't live directly with a convicted felon. The Office of Supervision, Probation, and Parole will not authorize that.
Well, let's get to some more of those details in a few minutes. I want to focus on your story, though. So, you know, as a child, you had a strained relationship. You could categorize that differently, I suppose, with your parents, right? Which isn't all that uncommon either. Matter of fact, I ended up in the Marine Corps at 17 because I was rebelling against my parents and told them to kiss off and walked out the door and went into the Marine Corps. You know, so we all kind of go through those things. But anyway, you ended up in some trouble that I believe started with your work at the car dealership.
Correct. Yes.
Tell me the story, Matt. And if you don't want to say, just tell me you don't want to say, but you don't really make it clear to me in the book what the crime was that originally got you in trouble. I think you admitted that you made a mistake, right?
Correct. So I worked at a car dealership, Freedom Nissan, on Shelburne Road in South Burlington. I was a car salesman, and they did not pay me for commissions that I earned. And I thought that I would sell the car sell the car online, and I ended up selling it to an undercover police officer, I believe, in North Carolina.
And you kept the money?
No, I never got any money.
What?
I never. They caught me stealing the car, and then they charged me with.
Oh, okay. So when you took the car off the lot,
correct.
That was auto theft.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that a felony?
Yes.
And that's a pretty
grand theft auto.
Yeah, which is pretty significant, right?
And operating the vehicle without the owner's consent as well.
All right. So I got you. So you're working there. You're not the best with self-control. How old were you at this time when you were in the car?
So it was 2004.
So 25?
Yes.
25ish, yeah. All right, so you're in your mid-20s. You're a little rambunctious, and these guys aren't paying your commissions. You get a little ticked off. Now, we're not hearing their side of the story, but either way, we are where we are at this point. And you decide, you know what? I'm going to take this car and I'm going to go sell it to get even, basically, right? To make
Correct.
good, to make things right.
Yes.
And so the police take that and they decide that they're going to charge you with this felony crime. Now, Matt, had you had any other brushes with the law, or any, not even a record, but had you had any involvement with the police, or was there any reason your employer would have that you were doing any other kinds of theft or nefarious activities while you were there? Or was that just limited to this?
Other than traffic infractions, there was a time that I received a ticket that a officer never
So
actually
nothing
stopped.
serious.
Correct.
Traffic. All right. So you'd never been in trouble before. You're basically a disgruntled employee.
Correct.
Right? And you do this act, which is obviously illegal. You know that, right?
Correct.
There's other ways that you would have to pursue that. But I understand your dilemma. So now the police are involved. Was there never a point in that process where either the employer said, hey, you know what? I'm just get this guy out of here. Give me my car back. I don't want to press charges. Or was there ever a point where the police were like, listen, I mean, this is not a career car criminal, car thief we're talking about here. This is an employee dispute. The guy got a little carried away. Was there any point in that process where anybody was not looking at this like a capital crime?
Absolutely not.
They just went right for blood.
Correct.
Wow. Fascinating. So you go to court and you're convicted, obviously.
Correct.
What was the sentence?
A year and a half in prison, and supervision, I think, for 3 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow. This is fascinating to me because I know we've had cases here in Pennsylvania where I had a good friend, business owner, very trusted long-term employee. They believe stole, I don't know the full amount, probably $300,000 in cash. I don't think there was any prison time. Interesting, right? The difference in treatment there. I don't want to make this podcast about the prison time, but you were treated poorly, which you detail in the book. And I think that story is, best if you want to hear that, go get the book and read all about that. And you get the answers there because you definitely go into all the details there. But you were basically getting ignored and treated unfairly out of prison, in prison, right? By the guards, the fellow prisoners alike. I can tell you, Matt, in reading your book and my own experience, I have, I think, a pretty good idea of exactly what happened. With your personality and this autism, whatever that label means, it tends to create an environment of agitation and conflict around with others too, right? That miscue in timing. And especially in a prison environment, as I was reading your story, I'm thinking, I can understand exactly how this happened. What I don't understand is, if I'm hearing your story right, and this is the first prison experience, that there was never, and I'm looking at this and I can clearly see, hey, this guy needs to be removed from this environment and this needs to be handled differently. Now that you told me the car theft story, probably starting from that point, you would have thought that a reasonable judge would have gotten involved and said, hey, all right, hold on, Matt. What's really going on here? Okay, Matt, I'm going to give you a fine and I'm going to put you in the jail for 30 days as a gift.
Right.
And if you come back here, I don't know what all their options are, but if I see you back here, you're going to do the 2 years that I should have gave you. So get your act together and knock this off. I'm thinking it should have been something along those lines.
Correct. We tried to get into mental health court, which is a program that the state offers, which would have deferred the sentence, and I would have had to show up to court, I believe, on a weekly or monthly basis to check in. And as long as I was doing everything, I wasn't picking up any charges, I would be allowed to go home. However, that did not happen. And the judge that oversaw that was a man that you may know, Judge Jeffrey Crawford, who was also my sentencing judge in the federal case. He and a man named Bob Wolford, who I saw for years at the Howard Mental Health Facility for psychiatry. Both had weigh-in, and they both felt that I did not meet these standards, whatever those may be, to qualify to be in the mental health court.
I'll tell you, Matt, I'll tell you this story. We had a neighbor, elderly, and where we used to live, they were very close to us, where we lived in town. And the husband developed dementia. And I want to give you a little perspective from the people that don't have autism, right? In this case, it was dementia. But behaviorally speaking, the result is kind of the same for the people around you. Different condition, different, way of obviously displaying it, but kind of the impact on the people around him is kind of the same. And the wife had come to me. Now he was in his mid 80s. She was in her late 70s. And she came to me at one point and said, my husband's hitting me. And we said, well, you need to report that. We knew he'd developed dementia. Well, finally, one night it escalated to the point where he hurt her. And she came to us for help, which we did. And I was there to calm him down and while the police came. And I'll tell you, Matt, there was a point where his personality changed. And I'll tell you what, my blood pressure and anger level went through the roof. And I've had this happen before. And I think that's what was happening to you. What I found, and I don't know you, we spoke a little bit by phone, and now we're doing this interview, and I read your book and your story. But I think that people such as yourself can be very charismatic and convincing. And also, because of the way you interact, can also really make people extremely angry, agitated. And the result of that is exactly, you fall into the pattern. They want to be more retaliatory. Oh, we have to protect everybody from this person. And maybe some of that's true. We'll talk through the story a little more, because I don't think that applies in your case. But people grow angry, bitter, resentful. And I can see that demonstrated in your story. And I could see how that could happen. I don't want to work through the story. I remain amazed that nobody in that process, especially in this system, a lawyer, somebody had the maturity and the emotional intelligence to look at this situation and see that something is wrong. So you steal the car, if you will. I don't even really call it stealing the car. I mean, I know what you did was wrong. And if I was the business owner, I would have called the police on you. But I think I may have dropped the charges in that case. I can't say for sure, but you would think somebody along the lines would. You go to jail, you get your sentence, you get out, right? And it was a horrific stay. It would be for anybody. And like I said, the details of that are in the book, and a fantastic story. Now you do your time, you did the crime, you did the time, and now you get out. But you got a problem, right? Because you got a record. And pick up the story from there. You get out of jail, you're on parole. Probation, sorry, yeah.
Right.
And so what happened from there? You got to live, right? You need a place.
I got to live and find a job and find an employer that will hire me despite a criminal record. And it was, trust me, it was a lot easier then than it is now, because background checks have been so prolific. The main reason is because of schools and having people with sex crime convictions not being anywhere near children. And so as a result, it's really manifested into almost all white collar companies. It's a liability thing.
So you're out on probation, and it's a condition of the probation that you have to work, correct?
Yes.
But at the same time, it's hard to get employment with a record.
Very hard. And like I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, it was a lot easier back then than it is today. It's very, very difficult.
So what kind of jobs were available to you then?
Bagging groceries at a store, cashiering, delivering pizza, very low paying jobs, didn't offer any benefits. I was a hospitality, I've received my bachelor's degree in hospitality, and I'm not saying it's beneath me, but I was certainly looking for something better, a career.
Right. You wanted to further yourself like anybody else.
Right.
It's hard to produce a living on the great part-time jobs, I guess, but not in terms of careers so much. And
Right.
so you had a dilemma. So what happened? Tell us the story. You got in more trouble, right?
So I started working for companies under other people's names, and then depositing checks in other people's names, because a background and check was involved with each of these companies.
So let's just go through the reality of that a second. I found this to be fascinating.
Correct.
In the sense that I'm kind of shocked that it's much of a crime, because I don't understand where the victim is in this. So let's say that you go, you apply for a job in my name is what you were doing, right?
Yes. I already had the social security number and the date of birth.
How'd you get that?
Asking other people to provide me with that information and saying that I could help them find a job.
So okay. So you would come to me and you would say, hey, Chris, I can help you find a job. Give me a little information here and I'll see what I can get for you.
Yes.
And so they would give it to you thinking that you were going to help them get a job.
Right.
And instead you use that information to apply for a job yourself using their name and social security number.
Right. So it wasn't just other people, it was also my brother.
Gotcha. And so what is the ramification to the person on the receiving end of that? Is there tax consequences and things like that?
There would, however, the amounts that I was making were so low that it probably wouldn't even fall in the threshold.
Yeah.
So in my attorney, when I was arrested, my attorney what did
you get arrested for in that case?
Identity theft and money laundering.
So Matt, my big thing is the truth, right? Were you doing anything else nefarious along that time, or was it only what we just discussed, that you needed a job, so you were desperate, and you used that social security number only to get a job? So you may be creating a tax liability to the individual, but also contributing to their social security. So I guess that kind of goes both ways. Not really any real harm done to anybody. Were you doing anything else that would have caused harm to that individual?
I was not. In fact, when it came time for my sentencing, the government was unable to produce one single victim, and they were unable to show any financial loss to that person.
Unbelievable.
And my attorney's 32 years of practicing law, he has never seen this. Usually the victim has had significant financial loss and can document that.
Man, how many people are we talking about? How many people did you do this to? I don't know.
I would say between 15 and 20.
It's a pretty good number, but and why so many? I mean, how many jobs were you getting with all these names?
I was working for 10 or 15 different companies.
Doing what?
Merchandising, third-party work.
What is that?
Remote work. Stocking shelves, putting up signage.
In stores?
In stores. I was remote, so the employer never met me. They didn't know me. They didn't.
So what would they do? They would ship you the signs or whatever, and it would be your job to go to the stores in your area?
Correct.
I
put it up and take photos.
Okay. And were you doing the work?
I was, yes.
Wow. And so this really, to me, I can understand that you would be charged if caught, but you got sentenced again for this. This wasn't the federal case. We're still at the state level, right?
No, this is the federal case.
Oh, this is the federal case. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So what happened was the state took it on. However, the government, the U.S. federal thought that because of the identity theft, yeah, and because of the prior issues with lying and being deceptive, that they would like to take this on.
Matt, I'll have to tell you, and I'll say this for the people watching and listening to this. I didn't believe what you wrote in the book. I thought that there was something missing. I really did. As I was reading it, I said, there's something he's not telling us here. And I did a little research, and your story, as best I can tell, checks out. This blows my mind. So for that crime, you get strung up on federal identity theft charges.
Right. Which if I was convicted, I would get a mandatory 2-year sentence on each of the counts. And I believe it was 3 or 4. I'm not sure exactly how many charges they gave me with identity. You didn't get
convicted in federal court? You won that?
So no, I got convicted, but I pled to money laundering, which did not care, and
how did it turn into money?
To a probation officer.
Right.
So I
forgot. That's a piece of the story we missed. So you had a job at one point you liked, right? Tell us the story.
So I was under supervision. This is in 2016. I'm sorry, I was on pretrial release, which means I had to work, and I was still under supervision, even though I hadn't been convicted. So I was under the supervision of a woman named Parrish Gibson, and we had an okay relationship. I would work and check in with her every so often at her discretion when she felt that I needed to check in. In about November, she and the U.S. Attorney, Michael Drescher, along with John Schroeder, decided that they wanted to ask the judge to add an additional condition of my supervision, in that if I were to get a job, I would need to tell any prospective employer the ramifications of hiring a convicted felon, which in and of itself would guarantee that I would not get any job. So as a result, and the judge, John Conroy, who's the magistrate judge, bought into their nonsense and agreed to this. As a result, it would guarantee that I wouldn't find a job. So what I did was I pretended to be this employer and called Parrish Gibson, pretending to be Cosmos Prinback, and saying that Matthew Melvin had told him that I was a convicted felon and I was okay with that. And of course, she figured out that it was not this person and charged me with lying to a probation officer, which landed me in jail.
Matt, how much money were you making at that time? Annual?
I would say around 15 or 20,000.
All total?
All total, yes.
From 20 different employers at that time, or do you have?
Yeah, I mean the work is not constant. It's sporadic based on projects and the companies needing folks. And at that time they were probably paying $8 to $12 an hour.
Understood. Okay, so this is almost practically a contract labor agreement. These part-time, as needed basis.
Correct.
You might go for this particular company to put signs up in stores in your area, 6 or 8 hours at $10 an hour, and you were just doing a bunch of that.
Right.
And they ran you up on federal charges for that.
Correct. They went through 5 grand juries in the state of Vermont, and finally, inevitably got an indictment against me. Probably spent $500,000, because, as you know, the government will indict a ham sandwich, and when the government wants to try to charge somebody, they will just present anything and everything they have, whether it's admissible or not, at trial, and hope that a grand jury will come back with a indictment.
It's unreal to me, Matt, that this all went on. And like I said, as best I could through my research, I did verify this story. You talk about your church involvement a little bit. Let me read a little excerpt from the book here. The Wilburs seemed different from the volunteers from various church groups that I had attended in the past. The Wilburs seemed concerned and fought to see me as often as possible. They saw potential in me that I had lost for quite some time. I had stayed in contact with Mo and Diane after I got out. I've now been attending their church twice a week religiously. Is that still the same today?
It is. Their church is in Swansea, New Hampshire. I live in Shelburne, Vermont. It's a 2.5-hour drive one way on a good day to go down and back. I met Mo and Diane when I was at Cheshire County, which was one of the facilities I was housed at, and really came to understand that these two individuals could help me a lot more than the 20-something mental health providers that I had seen for the last 36 years and had gained nothing. In fact, during that time, while I was seeing therapists, I was still committing crimes.
It's fascinating. I want to come back to that at the end. You talk quite a bit in the book about what it means to be homosexual. Some of the hypocrisy I find interesting. I talk about it a lot on the podcast. You know, today we live in this era where we seem to be highly sympathetic to homosexuality, and I don't feel sympathetic to anything really. In that regard, I should say I'm sympathetic to things, but not in terms of how somebody feels sexually. You feel the way you feel. You're born the way you're born, or whatever the case may be. And the danger in that, I think, is that there's people out there that go, the person's gay, and so they must be nice. And they say, that's not always the case. And you find that as a homosexual person too.
Right.
A lot of details about that in the book that you go through there. Do you think that, in your opinion, do you feel that the way you were treated by the criminal justice system was impacted because you were gay? You feel you were discriminated against?
In the prison atmosphere, yes.
By the other inmates?
By other inmates, and there were several instances where I was put in solitary confinement because other inmates told the guards that I was propositioning them.
Yeah. Now, you were on the receiving end of a lot of anger and hostility, and in some cases, sheer brutality.
So that was part of it. It was the other piece that I haven't spoken about was that I would constantly file grievances, which only irritated the staff about different things that were going wrong, and it only angered them. So I became a target, because of the grievances, and then because of my being homosexual.
That's another thing, and I don't know. Most people don't expect to find themselves in the criminal justice system, but I think in terms of the courts and dealing with these things generally, I think that there's a piece of information that people don't understand, and that is that the system is connected, meaning that the judges are connected to the prosecutors, to the police, and to the prison staff.
Right.
And in some ways you say, well, that's very nefarious and underhanded, but there's no way around it. And the reason for that is because they work together every day. The police are the ones bringing the people to the DA, and they're the ones bringing it in front of the judge. I know because not in this type of capacity, but in a different type of capacity, I worked in that environment. And I had a certain reputation with the judges, which I well earned because I operated ethically, and they knew that. Right. And what and I believe that most people in these systems are. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, having worked in government, that there are people who are not, and that's a fact. You have people that are incompetent. You have people that, get bitter. Some of them, narcissists, all types of psychological issues that haven't been diagnosed, and they're allowed to work in government, but not allowed to work in the private sector because of their record. So you have that, but I believe that most of the people are doing a good job, and they have good credibility. And I'll tell you, Matt, I used to say this to my wife, with the credibility that I had, if I went into court, if I had a vendetta against you when I was working that arena, and if I wanted to act on that, you were going to have a problem because I had credibility in that system.
And I saw that with a man named Aaron Noble, who was the police chief for 15 or 20 years. I'm not exactly sure the time frame. But he did not like me. We didn't get along very well. And that went back to the DARE program, where he came into the schools, and I didn't want to participate. I've never really liked police officers. Although I will tell you that Mo Wilbur is a former police officer, so it's kind of a little ironic. But it's really about the person.
Why don't you like police officers?
I just don't find them. First of all, police officers cooperate with each other, and they're the biggest gang in America. And they tend to not treat people correctly if they have a problem with you. And as you mentioned, if you were to say that Matt Melvin is a really bad person, that your credibility would outweigh mine.
Right. Yeah, I would say this though, Matt. I think it's as unreasonable to say that to group police activity together as it would be to group homosexuals in their actions. I would agree with you.
I agree with you. However, I can tell you when I'm driving down the road and there's a police officer behind me and I am not doing anything wrong, I will get off the road and let that police officer go. And that will never go away, sir. Despite the time lapse and being, making better decisions in my life, that fear will never go away.
Here's another interesting phenomenon, Matt. Very interesting, our different perspectives, and I can really understand what you're saying. And my interactions with police are wholly the opposite. I just remain always respectful. I think I got pulled over. Actually, it would have been 8 years ago now. It was right before my daughter was born. And the cop let me go. My registration was expired. I was just courteous, and he saw my veteran sticker, and I got a pass. You probably would not have been treated that way. And
never.
And what's interesting, Matt,
even, sir, if I had a support the police bumper sticker, which I wouldn't put, because I think that would be hypocritical for me to put when I don't feel that way. However, if soon as they run my record, I would not get any chances at all.
But here's the thing, Matt. Here's what I wanted to share with you, and I'm not being judgmental in saying this. You ever heard the saying that people that are afraid of dogs are 3 times more likely to get bit? And I've seen that phenomena. The dogs, and I think it's and it's a good analogy what's happening in your case. And please, I'm not saying that people are dogs, but the dogs sense that fear, that anxiety, and they interpret it as a threat.
Right.
The same thing's happening with the cops. I was never a cop, but like I said, working in government, you get a sense for things that are out of place very quickly, both in terms of asking questions, in terms of stories. That's why I'm asking you the probing questions that I'm asking. Let me just make sure this adds up here, because if this one piece is missing, that changes the whole context of the story. And I'm going to get to one of those points in a second, but if I was a cop, like I said, I wasn't, but I would think that me coming up behind somebody and them pulling over would actually probably cause me to stop. It would make me suspicious of what you were doing. So interestingly, I think, and I'm guessing from the book that some of your actions were things you're trying to avoid, believe it or not, through no fault of yours. And I'm not saying that the police should be treating you that way. But I think it's all being misinterpreted. I think you're misinterpreting the best action. They're misinterpreting what's going on, and it's causing you a heap load of problems. You said something. I asked you earlier if you had any dealings with the police prior to that first arrest. You said no, I believe you, other than traffic, things like that. But the chief of police knew you just said, from the DARE program. So there was a relationship there.
It was a negative relationship, yes. And there was also a time that he claimed that I hit his car when I didn't. But
let's go back to the DARE thing a second.
Sure.
What got his back so up about that? I mean, this is a school program. You're in school. He's a cop. Like, how does this get off the rails so badly?
I'm not sure I know, sir. That was in 98.
Right.
So that was a long, long time ago. And I'm not sure. But I can tell you that I was constantly harassed by police.
One of the stories that sticks out in my mind, Matt, in this regard, just to wrap this up, we'll move on. You tell the story how I think you were singing in jail, and the other inmates what were you singing? Country music, right?
Yes.
And was this mostly blacks in the jail with you?
Correct.
Yeah. So here comes this white guy, this white gay guy, right? And here's another thing, demographically speaking. I know many Black Americans that have really strong negative feelings about homosexuality. And so you get into this environment, and on your end, you're just singing, right? Because you try to be a happy guy, but they didn't like that.
Correct.
And you were really mistreated, and that's just one of the little stories, right? For the capital crime of singing some country music, right? They basically verbally assaulted you and really gave you a hard time over that, right?
Right.
Are you still perplexed today? Do you understand why they got so riled up about that? Doesn't make that you can't understand it, can you?
No, and I think, to try to understand other people you can't always understand other people. You don't know where they came from. You don't know what kind of upbringing they had. And I think a key piece of this is that the lack of empathy. Until you've walked in that man's shoes, what that man has been through. You have absolutely no right to give them advice or to try to get them to do something else.
True. But let me just say this. Occasionally I even listen to a little old school rap, not often, but I don't particularly care for rap music. And if I pull up to the gas station occasionally, not so much where we live, but occasionally there will be somebody there with the windows rolled down with a very obnoxious car speaker with music blaring that it doesn't even matter what kind of music is that I don't like. And it irritates me. It angers me. Have I ever thought, boy, I could knock that person in the head? Oh yeah, it's crossed my mind. Would I do it? No, I wouldn't assault somebody over something like that. In the right conditions, could I see myself saying something to them? Yeah. And the reason is, it's because it's kind of, even though it's not a crime, they're not doing anything wrong, they're playing the radio like anybody could, because it's obnoxious and it irritates the people around them. And like I said, I don't agree with the way you were treated as a result, but I can see the nature of the problem, I think, a little differently than you can. And I say all that's just the point to the book is just a fascinating read, Matt, to where you've opened up really genuinely your thought process and what was happening to you. And I don't know that everybody will be able to put it together. Hopefully I've helped with a couple of the pieces there.
And there was also, I'd like to bring this up. I was constantly journaling while I was in prison, which is a big no-no. I was journaling about everything that was going on, kind of like...
Matt, let me back up a second. I
Sure.
can tell you right now, even something you're doing right now. So I have a history of working in government. And I've seen it happen where people would get their names published. I saw where YouTube videos were done. I did have it happen to me on social media where a disgruntled resident was unhappy with me and was making some very egregious Facebook posts. There's not a lot of lines of work where you get subjected to that kind of thing. And my case, of course, just like you, I don't feel that I did anything wrong. I shouldn't have been subjected to that. And my family certainly shouldn't be subjected to that harassment. I understand your point about filing the grievances. And I think what I was trying to get at earlier, and I think this is important for people to understand. I say it a lot with firearms. If you're going to, and you can't, I guess, but for people that are going to own firearms or carry a firearm, you better know how to handle the situation if you ever have to use it. Because if you call the police and say, I just shot somebody, you're going to jail because that's a crime. And you just admitted it when you called. So the way you phrase things can make all the difference. You file on those grievances. And, from what I could tell, the ones you described, you had every right in the world to file. They were valid grievances. Whether it was a good idea for you or not, clearly we know the answer to that, and probably not. And I could see how that would all quickly develop into a pattern. And I said that the judges and all are connected. Well, it's not that they're connected with super glue in a sense. And it's not to say that they always like each other and get along, because that's not always what's happening. But the fact of the matter is, on some level, I don't know the system, there was a report that was taken from the prison about you and given to either the prosecutor or the probation person. And in some way that got to the judge. Yes. And the judge, whether he agreed with it or didn't agree with it, in your case, it sounds like he did go along. But if the prison staff are saying, hey, this guy's dangerous, we don't recommend his release, he's been nothing but trouble, even if it's complete lies for the reason I described earlier, you got a real problem, and you suffered at that.
We also saw that when I was at a halfway house in Albany, New York. And I don't know if I talked about this.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Where the actual woman that ran the facility was convinced that within a year I would be back in prison trying to get to a halfway house, which she would not allow me to do. And guess what? I proved her wrong because I'm not there and haven't applied to go back there.
Good for you, Matt. I want to talk a little bit about the yin and the yang of you. The yang would be, you say here, I've walked out of restaurants without paying a bunch of times. Every crime I've committed has been impulsive. And in that sense, what's the word? Pathological. You're a little bit pathological, or what would you say? What's the word for somebody who has no conscience? I'm trying to think, but you got up and walked out. It didn't bother you one bit, did it?
It didn't then. It would today.
Why is it bothering you
That's the big difference.
Oh, fair enough. That's good, Matt. And I wasn't being judgmental, but I was just kind of explaining. But let's talk about, well, at that time, you get up and walk out. It didn't bother you one bit.
Correct. And
why is that? Did you feel that you were owed? You just didn't care? What was your thinking?
Can I get away with it? It was really
the thrill of getting away with it.
Getting away with it.
Gotcha. You know, I've talked, I'm out of it now, but I was a landlord for many years, mostly commercial. But we had a couple of houses that we rented as well. And as a landlord, you'll see the people that manipulate. I had in one story in particular, a woman, she was very low income, had some kids and stuff like that, and was very convincing. And I tried to help her out, and I got stuck with all kinds of bills out of that. And which brings me kind of to where you are now. You've been to church and you've re-examined your conscience, and you feel differently about that kind of thing now. Am I right?
Right.
How so? What would you say now about walking out like that?
Would you want, if you were the business owner, how would you feel if that were your business?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's exactly right. So you've changed your ways, which I think is incredible personal journey for you. But then also with your way of thinking and that same disregard, if you will, or impulsiveness, in some cases serves you really well. You say, I'm an excellent salesman. I've always been number one or number two salesman in whatever field I'm working in. Why? What do you credit that to? Why are you such a good salesman?
I'm quickly able to build rapport, find commonality with the person I'm talking to, and I don't take the rejection personally. I've been rejected so much. I've dealt with so much rejection in my own life, from family to schools to being bullied to being bullied by the Shelburne police officer to being bullied by some of the mental health providers to being bullied by the courts. That it really doesn't faze me. And I've seen that when, I was out trying to support the Trump campaign, and my favorite people to go and knock on the doors were Clinton supporters and big, huge signs out front, trying to figure out why they would want to vote for such a terrible candidate.
It's fascinating, Matt. I was at a Doug Mastriano campaign event for governor. I've gotten to know Doug a little bit. Him and his wife, been to quite a few events with him. I'm on the board of an organization. We gave him an award. So I had some connections with him. And I went to this campaign event, and it was kind of a rah-rah thing. It was out of my area. I really went just to support the effort. But anyway, there was protesters out front, and I kind of got bored with it. So I said, I'd rather go talk to the protesters. And that's exactly what I did. And I had a far more engaging conversation with them. I have that same fascination. It's really cool, Matt. It's really a shame to me what you've had to go through. I think that, that impulsiveness, manifests itself to people looking at it as selfishness, and people have a really hard time processing it and how to deal with it. I'm really glad to hear the changes that you've made. Seeing personal development and the topic of personal development is something that's dear to me. I've written a motivational book, and it's something I talk about occasionally on the podcast. I like encouraging people to improve and do better, and it's something that I constantly strive for too. And so I'm glad that things have turned a bit of a corner for you.
I've also been part of a company or an organization called The Crucible, which really helps Christian folks that are struggling to be able to really put the shadow the things that they're hiding, whether it's, confidence or things that they don't want other people to see. Insecurity is a huge one, and be able to get those out there, because the more we hide those things, the more we can't become we can't better ourselves. Those shadows are holding us all back, and we all have them. If anybody were to say I don't have them, they would be a liar.
How do you think that people around you could best help you? And I don't know the best example, but take the music scenario or a situation similar to that. How could somebody approach you differently that would help the situation, as opposed to what you've gotten in the past? So in the past, sounds like, just using that story, people would harass you, threaten you, sometimes worse. But if I came up to you and said, Matt, the music is annoying everybody, can you just please stop singing? And, so that everybody else can, would you respond to that? What would be best?
I could respond to that better, yes, than being harassed or intimidated or sent threatening letters under the prison doors.
Mm. You think you're going to go back to prison, or you think it's done and behind you?
I'm never going back to prison.
Great. What if you could change one thing about the criminal justice system? What would it be?
The ability for people that had been convicted of crimes to have the ability to have their record expunged, which today is virtually impossible, because so many offenses, and I'm not talking, there are certain offenses that I deem that should not be able to be expunged. However, white collar crimes, financial crimes, should be able to be expunged. However,
I think I would agree with you. First of all, broadly speaking, that there needs to be a path to success, and that's the failure of the system.
Correct.
When you get out and in many cases, not in your case, but in many prison stories, it's generational, right?
Right.
And everybody is convicted of a crime, right? LA, Chicago, every major city has this phenomena going on. And so now you go to prison, and there's really such little chance of getting out of that washing machine because of the rules, right? You can't stay on probation if you can't get a job, but you can't get a job because of your record. You can't live with anybody who has a record, but everybody has a record. So now you have no place to live, you can't get a job, and so you can't be on probation. And by default, you end up, and even if you're really trying to do your best, right?
Right.
And you get out of that and say, you know what? I'll go live in a tent or whatever. I'll live in the cheapest rooming house I can find. I'll walk 25 miles to my grocery store bagging job, making $10 an hour. Even if you do all that, the temptation to sell some car parts or take a little package across town for an extra $50, the temptation of that is huge, and people just get sucked into it. I
will also tell you that I've talked to some people that have served as juror members. And one of the pastors that I became friends with, that I met behind bars, told me that he served on a jury in which an individual said, a juror member said, let's just get this guy convicted. I've got to go back to work. So the mentality is that the person is guilty. And whenever somebody is charged with a crime, the government has unlimited resources and an unlimited amount of money to go after that person. So even if you are a rich person like George Soros and you are a defendant, the government still has more resources and more money if they want to go after you. Unlimited resources. And in the federal system, the conviction rate is 96%.
Yes, really, nobody walks away from that unscathed. Matt, it's a fascinating story, and I think it's a book worth reading, both entertaining and educational. Why should somebody buy the book?
if you're a person that knows anybody that's been in prison, if you have a family member or friend who is making bad decisions, whether they're trying marijuana or whether they're speeding, this is the path that I took. I was one of those speeders that started off with just some speeding tickets, and that manifested into serving in prison. So all those signs led to the revelation that this may happen, and it did. So I think it's a good book, and it will really outline the real problems with the criminal justice system.
Matt, it's a fascinating book. You did a great job writing it. Bullied Behind Bars, a gay Christian Trump supporter goes to prison, by Matthew Melvin. Matt, it was great having you on. I enjoyed the conversation, and looking forward to having you back sometime. Thanks so much.
Thank you.